Hi, I'm Bill Keith with Entertainment Weekly. Thank you for joining us for this Q&A with the cast of TNT's new psychological thriller, The Alienist. We have the cast here. We have Daniel Brühl, Dakota Fanning, and luuuuuke-evans. We have questions from you that you've sent in. We also have some exclusive clips to show you. But before we do, I'd just love to talk to you guys about the idea that your premiere is finally here. Does it feel like you taped this 10 years ago or 10 years ago?
10 minutes for me, honestly. It was one of the best filming experiences, if not the best that I've ever had. It was March to September in Budapest, and I pretty much never left. I was there pretty much the whole time, and it feels like 10 seconds ago, and I miss it all the time. I miss the experience.
The production looks incredible. It's unrecognizable as Budapest. Do you remember the first time you walked on set and were able to actually see the world of The Alienist?
The exterior set was when we started shooting, they were just finishing it. It had taken 3 months to build. And they basically built 4 streets around 2 blocks of New York so that you could shoot 360 on a traveling shot in a carriage or a walking shot, turn 4 or 5 corners before you had to shout cut, which I've never experienced that unless you're working on a real street. And the attention to detail of that set was just extraordinary, really was. And they would be able to change the facade of the street depending on what area of New York we were supposedly shooting on. So if it was Chinatown, you know, everything would be Chinese, and they'd be cooking on the street with woks and flames and hanging fish and drying, you know, whatever it was that they were drying. And it really was like a time capsule. Every day we dropped into another time or another part of New York City. And it was already dressed with hundreds of extras and animals and smoke and noise. And I mean, you know, and you had high-rise buildings. So there was nothing to take you out of apart from the odd plane, like you mentioned earlier. But apart from that, we were very lucky to work in an immersive set, which completely allowed us to just disappear.
Then also Budapest itself was perfect in our purpose to recreate especially upper-class New York. I mean, there's so much grand architecture. It's amazing. The Opera House, the most beautiful in the world. I'm maybe fan number 2 behind Dakota, but I have to say I was irritated at first when I got the call. We're going to shoot this show, but in Budapest, I thought like, it's a bit irritated. I didn't know the city, so. I wasn't sure how they would be able to do that, but the second I arrived in Budapest, I have to say it was just perfect.
Before we get into talking about your individual characters, I'd like to show a clip of the scene when you all sort of get together for the very first time at Delmonico's, which seems to be shot in yet another gorgeous location.
It's a library in Budapest, yeah.
Okay, wow.
A toast to the beginning of a fruitful partnership.
Kosher.
I thought we'd start with a terrapin soupe au clair, one of the specialties of the house. I hope no one minds serious conversation while we eat, but I believe it's best to get a running start.
Well, perhaps you could tell us what exactly we're getting a running start at.
Oh my, I've gotten ahead of myself, haven't I? Of course, I should explain.
Perhaps if we begin, your intentions will become self-explanatory.
Please.
We've already made Dr. Chrysler aware of the results of our examination of this Feig boy.
The torso was grossly violated while the eyes were carefully plucked from their sockets.
Gentlemen, there is a lady present.
Oh, enough, John. I am perfectly capable of hearing whatever it is that needs to be said. Continue, please.
Thus, we asked ourselves, what instrument might be found capable of both cutting muscles and tendons and prying eyeballs from their sockets?
Behold, the Arkansas toothpick.
The blade is strong enough to cause the wounds the boy suffered to his torso,
but finely weighted to delicately remove his eyes. we found this. A bloody finger mark left on the back of this timepiece. We discovered the trinket within the Zweig boy's burial suit.
Their file referenced it. It was found on the roof near the water tank, wasn't it?
And thus spared degradation.
A person leaving a finger mark such as this might as well drop a monogrammed handkerchief.
And so he did.
Who? You talk about him as if you know him.
We don't yet know him, John. But we will. We may not know his name or where he lives, but he exists in plain sight. Though evidence does not immediately reveal him, there are hints and indications to his identity that he's unwittingly left behind. Now, our task is to gather those hints and indications, to construct an image of the man, his age, his background, his habits, but most importantly, his appetites. Look at who his victims are, where he commits his crimes, and what exactly he does to them, until a pattern begins to emerge. Each and every one of the choices he makes will reveal a hidden aspect of his alienated mind. And there's one more thing. We know the killer's conscious thoughts are fixed on violence. If we get too close, that violence might well spill over onto us.
Is it always that easy breezy at Chrysler's dinner table? If you could, I guess now's as good a time as any to sort of walk me through who your characters are in the show and how they were sort of introduced to you when you were being presented with the opportunity to play the characters.
Well, I have to say, I'm living with the best shrink in the world. My wife is a psychotherapist, so she was the first one I could, ask all these questions I had about the origins of psychology. And then I was fascinated by it because that was a young science. I think only in the 1870s it was seen as a proper science. Before that, it was a branch of philosophy. So these were really pioneers. These were one of the first guys took care of people with mental disorders, of people who they believed were alienated from themselves. And that caused a lot of outrage and fear in the society. They were seen as charlatans, as criminals, as being dangerous. So it was a fascinating chapter in that very science. And then I was completely absorbed and fascinated by it.
And Dakota, your character plays this sort of lone woman on the New York police force.
Yes.
Who is brought in by Chrysler?
Yes, kind of. So I play the first female to have a title at the New York Police Department. I'm the secretary to the police commissioner, and you quickly learn that my character and Luke's character have a sort of long-standing family friendship, so they know one another. And I am a woman who has desires to have a career, to be a detective, to advance myself in society through work and ambition instead of just marrying a rich man, which was the norm for a woman of Sarah's class. And that's completely out of the question for her. So she meets the two of them as they're meeting with her boss, the police commissioner, Teddy Roosevelt, and sort of gets at first drawn into the investigation to be a liaison between Dr. Chrysler and the police department, or the police commissioner. And, we see, of course, her investment and expertise and knowledge grow throughout the season. And I think that we all play a very equal part in this investigation. And that's my favorite part of the show, I think, is seeing our relationships change and grow, and we challenge one another and kind of come into our own in different ways at different times. And so I think we really get to explore that throughout the 10 hours.
Obviously, the show goes to some pretty dark places, but a lot of people on Twitter are asking if you have a scene that was the most challenging to play, and sort of where you might have had to have some tough conversations with yourself and the director and figuring out what to do to execute it.
I remember there being one where we were all in it. And without, I'm not giving anything away, we know. But we failed to catch the killer on the night we think we were going to catch him, and inevitably another child dies. And we're faced with the body of that child at the mortuary on an ice block the following day. And I remember that it was a very solemn moment because we were also physically, as Dakota, Luke, and Daniel, very tired. It was an exhaustingly emotional journey, you know, dealing with this subject matter. It's horrible, you know, and it's visual and it's dark and twisted. And, you know, some of these scenes were incredibly, you know, they really were so real and so, you know, graphic that you couldn't help but be affected by them. And you know, I remember that scene, and I've seen it. It's actually a little tiny clip of it in some of the trailers you've had on the television, and I can see it in our faces, and it's really, you know, it's real. It was like, God, we've lost another one, you know, and the guilt that we're racked with because of it.
On a lighter note,
Is there one? You get used to it after a while, though, right?
We can talk about this all day.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for your pretty damn near perfect series. It's fantastic. The Alienist premieres on Monday at 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 Central on TNT.